For decades, North Korea has remained an enigma, a secluded nation shrouded in secrecy. It exists in stark contrast to its vibrant, technologically advanced southern counterpart. Defectors' stories paint a grim picture of life under a totalitarian regime. Yet beneath the surface, a complex society exists. To understand its potential for transformation, we must first understand its history. The roots of the Kim dynasty's enduring grip lie in the tumultuous events of the 20th century. We will explore the lives of ordinary North Koreans, grappling with the realities of a closed society while harboring dreams of a more hopeful future. The story of North Korea is inextricably linked to the events that unfolded in the aftermath of World War II. In 1945, the peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel. The North fell under Soviet influence while the United States assumed control in the South. Kim Il-sung emerged as the head of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The seeds of the Juche ideology, emphasizing national self-reliance, were sown. The division of the peninsula would soon erupt into a conflict shaping North Korea's destiny. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953, a brutal conflict that pitted brother against brother, left an indelible scar on the Korean peninsula. North Korea, initially on the offensive, was ultimately pushed back to the 38th parallel. The war ended in a stalemate, profoundly impacting North Korea's trajectory. The country retreated into isolation, its people increasingly cut off from the world. The gap with South Korea widened, a stark reminder of isolation's price. Beneath the surface of unwavering conformity, a current of discontent had long simmered within North Korea. Years of economic hardship and iron-fisted control sowed seeds of doubt. Whispers of dissent began to find bolder expression. Acts of quiet resistance multiplied as the regime's grip wavered. Information seeped in, offering a glimpse beyond the regime's narrative. The people pushed to the brink were no longer content to suffer in silence. The catalyst for change came unexpectedly, ignited by a seemingly insignificant event. A student protest over food shortages quickly escalated into a full-blown uprising. Students, emboldened by their numbers, took to the streets chanting for freedom and democracy. The regime responded with brute force, but soldiers hesitated. Some even lowered their weapons, revealing cracks in the regime's facade. News spread like wildfire, transforming the protest into a nationwide revolution. The regime, its authority crumbling, faced an unexpected enemy, its own people. The unthinkable day had arrived. The Kim dynasty's grip on power was broken. The final hours of the Kim regime were marked by chaos and confusion. State-run media, its usual stream of propaganda replaced by static, went silent. The elaborate system of control, meticulously constructed over decades, unraveled with astonishing speed. The once feared security forces, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the uprising and demoralized by widespread defections, melted away. In a final act of defiance, protesters stormed the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun, the mausoleum where the embalmed bodies of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il lay in state. The desecration of this sacred site, unthinkable just days earlier, marked the definitive end of an era. The Kim dynasty, whose rule had seemed immutable, was no more. As darkness fell on Pyongyang, an eerie silence descended upon the city. The streets, just hours earlier, teeming with protesters, were now deserted, the air thick with a mixture of liberation and uncertainty. The music of propaganda, a constant backdrop to life in North Korea, had fallen silent. For the first time in living memory, the people were free. The collapse of the Kim regime, while celebrated by the majority of North Koreans, left a dangerous power vacuum in its wake. With no clear successor and the institutions of government in disarray, the country teetered on the brink of chaos. Rival factions, long suppressed under the Kim's iron rule, emerged from the shadows, vying for control. The military, once the backbone of the regime, was fractured, with some units remaining loyal to the old guard, while others aligned themselves with the burgeoning pro-democracy movement. Adding to the volatility, regional power brokers, long marginalized by the central government, saw an opportunity to assert their autonomy. Amidst the uncertainty, ordinary citizens, accustomed to taking orders, faced the daunting prospect of forging their own destiny. Neighborhood watch groups, formed to maintain order in the absence of a functioning police force, patrolled the streets, wary of looters and those seeking to exploit the chaos. The international community, caught off guard by the speed of the regime's collapse, scrambled to respond. The stakes were incredibly high. North Korea, a nation with a history of militarism and a nuclear arsenal, was on the verge of descending into anarchy. The world held its breath, hoping that the echoes of uncertainty would not turn into the roar of renewed conflict. Section 5, Dawn breaks, the world reacts. News of the North Korean regime's collapse sent shockwaves through the global community. Governments, long accustomed to dealing with the predictability of a reclusive dictatorship, were now faced with the unpredictable reality of a nation in flux. The world held its breath, a mixture of hope and trepidation hanging in the air. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session, grappling with the implications of the dramatic power shift. Long-standing alliances were tested as nations debated the best course of action. China, North Korea's closest ally and economic lifeline, found itself in a particularly delicate position. Humanitarian organizations, anticipating a massive crisis, mobilized resources and prepared to deliver aid to a population long subjected to deprivation. Medical supplies, food and other essential goods were gathered at staging points near the border, ready to be transported into the country as soon as the security situation permitted. The United States, long wary of North Korea's military ambitions, deployed naval forces to the region, both as a show of force and to assist with potential evacuation efforts. At the same time, diplomatic channels, dormant for years, were reactivated as the world sought to engage with the nascent leadership emerging from the ashes of the Kim regime. Section 6, Operation Hope, Securing a Fragile Peace. As dawn broke over a transformed Korean peninsula, the international community swung into action. Operation Hope, a coordinated effort involving dozens of countries and NGOs, was launched with the aim of stabilizing the region and preventing the power vacuum from escalating into chaos and bloodshed. A multinational peacekeeping force, led by South Korea and including contingents from China, the United States and other nations, was swiftly deployed to key locations throughout North Korea. Their mission to maintain order, protect civilians, and create a secure environment for the delivery of humanitarian aid. Humanitarian aid, stockpiled in anticipation of the crisis, began flowing across the border in a massive logistical operation. Medical teams, water purification units, and food distribution centers were established in cities and villages across the country, working tirelessly to address the immediate needs of the population. The challenges were immense, the situation fluid and unpredictable. But amidst the uncertainty, a sense of hope, fragile yet palpable, began to take root. The people of North Korea, freed from the shackles of tyranny, were finally taking their destiny into their own hands. The weight of freedom, navigating the unknown. The collapse of the Kim regime brought the immense task of rebuilding a nation shattered by isolation and authoritarian rule. For ordinary North Koreans, the sudden embrace of freedom was both exhilarating and disorienting. Navigating this unfamiliar landscape brought its own set of challenges. The concept of individual liberty was both liberating and daunting. Yet amidst this newfound freedom, the shadows of the past lingered. Section 2, Echoes of the Past, the Spectre of Division. Even as North Korea took its first tentative steps towards democracy, the spectre of division loomed large. The demilitarized zone, a physical and psychological barrier that had separated families and stifled interaction for over 7 decades, remained a potent symbol of the challenges ahead. The reunification of the Korean peninsula, a dream shared by many on both sides of the divide, was now a tangible possibility. But the path forward was fraught with complexity. Years of separation had created stark differences in culture, ideology, and economic development, making the prospect of integration a daunting task. South Korea, a global economic powerhouse, approached reunification with a mix of hope and apprehension. The cost of integrating the North's impoverished economy, estimated to be in the trillions of dollars, posed a significant challenge. Moreover, concerns about social unrest and the absorption of millions of North Koreans unaccustomed to democratic norms fueled a degree of hesitation. Within North Korea, too, opinions on reunification were divided. While many yearned for the day when families separated by the DMZ could be reunited, others harbored anxieties about losing their newfound freedoms or being relegated to second-class citizenship in a unified Korea. Section 3. Bridging the Divide, a Brother's Hand. Despite the challenges, the winds of change were blowing across the Korean peninsula. In a gesture that would have been unthinkable just months earlier, the newly elected president of South Korea extended a hand of friendship to his northern counterpart. High-level talks, initially focused on security and humanitarian concerns, gradually expanded to include discussions on economic cooperation and the possibility of a phased reunification process. Family reunions, suspended for years, resumed, offering a glimmer of hope to millions separated by the DMZ. South Korean businesses, sensing a historic opportunity, began investing in the North, providing much-needed capital and expertise to rebuild the country's shattered infrastructure. Joint ventures in sectors such as manufacturing, technology, and tourism created jobs and fostered economic interdependence, laying the groundwork for closer ties. Symbolic gestures, too, played a powerful role in bridging the divide. The two Koreas marched together under a unified flag at the Olympics, a testament to the shared heritage that transcended political differences. Cultural exchanges, once forbidden, resumed, allowing artists, musicians, and athletes to reconnect and rediscover their common ground. And Section 4, The World Watches, a Symphony of Aid. As North Korea embarked on its uncertain journey towards democracy and reunification, the international community rallied to its aid. Operation Hope, the largest humanitarian effort ever undertaken, continued apace, providing a lifeline to a nation struggling to emerge from decades of isolation and neglect. Hospitals, schools, and sanitation systems, neglected for years under the Kim regime, were rebuilt and modernized with the help of international donors. Medical professionals from around the world volunteered their services, providing critical care to a population that had long been deprived of adequate healthcare. The World Bank and other international financial institutions provided loans and grants to support North Korea's economic recovery, while NGOs worked tirelessly to promote sustainable development, improve agricultural practices, and empower local communities. The international community's commitment to North Korea's successful transition was not merely altruistic. A stable, democratic, and prosperous Korean peninsula was in everyone's interest, reducing the risk of conflict in a region long plagued by tension and mistrust. Section 5. The Price of Peace. Challenges to Reconstruction. The path to a brighter future for North Korea was not without its obstacles. The country's infrastructure, neglected for decades, was in a state of disrepair. Hospitals lacked essential equipment, schools were overcrowded and under-resourced, and the transportation network was inadequate for a modern economy. The transition from a centrally planned to a market-based economy proved challenging. Unemployment soared as state-owned enterprises, unable to compete in a free market, were forced to close or downsize. The lack of a skilled workforce and a culture of entrepreneurship hampered economic growth. Political reforms, while welcomed by many, also faced resistance. Former members of the Kim regime, accustomed to power and privilege, sought to obstruct the transition to democracy, clinging to the remnants of their authority. Corruption, a legacy of the old system, proved difficult to eradicate. The international community, while committed to supporting North Korea's transformation, also grappled with the legacy of mistrust and suspicion. Verification mechanisms were put in place to ensure that aid was reaching its intended recipients and that funds were not being diverted to nefarious purposes. Section 6, Seeds of Democracy, Nurturing a Fragile Bloom. Despite the challenges, the seeds of democracy, once sown in the ashes of the Kim regime, began to take root. North Korea held its first free and fair elections, a watershed moment in the nation's history. Citizens, many voting for the first time in their lives, lined up at polling stations, eager to exercise their newfound rights. A new constitution, based on democratic principles such as the separation of powers, the rule of law, and the protection of human rights, was drafted and ratified. Civil society organizations, long suppressed under the Kim regime, flourished, giving voice to a plurality of views and interests. Independent media outlets emerged, challenging the government's narrative and holding leaders accountable. Journalists, once mouthpieces for the regime's propaganda, embraced their role as watchdogs, exposing corruption and demanding transparency. Education, too, played a pivotal role in nurturing the fragile bloom of democracy. Textbooks purged of the Kim regime's ideology were rewritten to reflect a more balanced and accurate view of history. Students, encouraged to think critically and engage in open dialogue, embraced the opportunity to learn and grow in a free and open society. Section 7. The long road ahead, a future yet unwritten. The journey from darkness to light, from dictatorship to democracy, was a long and arduous one for North Korea. The challenges were immense, the scars of the past deep and enduring. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, a spirit of resilience and hope prevailed. The world watched with cautious optimism as North Korea took its place among the community of nations, no longer an isolated pariah but a partner in progress. The reunification of the Korean peninsula, once a distant dream, now seemed within reach, a testament to the transformative power of peace and reconciliation. The future of North Korea, like the future of any nation, remained unwritten. But the North Korean people, having tasted the sweet fruit of freedom, were determined to forge their own destiny, to build a society where human rights were respected, where prosperity was shared, and where the echoes of the past gave way to the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The invisible chains, life under surveillance. Surveillance was not merely a tool of the state, it was the very air North Koreans breathed, an invisible chain that bound them to the will of the regime. From the moment they awoke to the time they closed their eyes, North Korean citizens were acutely aware that their every move was being monitored. The invisible chains of surveillance, forged in fear, extended into every corner of society. A nation adrift in a sea of propaganda. Surveillance was only one facet of the Kim regime's control. Propaganda permeated every aspect of life, shaping thoughts and perceptions. State-controlled media praised the dear leader, highlighting his supposed wisdom. Art and literature extolled hard work and obedience to the party. Statues and portraits of the Kim family adorned every public space. This relentless propaganda fostered fear, conformity, and unquestioning obedience. The hunger for truth, information control, and its costs. The Kim regime's stranglehold on information was a calculated strategy to maintain power. By denying access to alternative viewpoints, the regime perpetuated its myth of invincibility. The cost was immense, depriving North Koreans of critical thinking and informed decisions. Despite efforts, the hunger for truth and glimpses of the outside world persisted. These glimpses offered hope for a different way of life. Section 4, A Glimmer in the Darkness, the Seeds of Dissent. Despite omnipresent surveillance and relentless propaganda, the seeds of dissent proved resilient. The human spirit had an unquenchable thirst for freedom. In the darkest corners, a nascent resistance began to take shape. Ordinary citizens, driven by hardship, faced incredible risks. Discovery meant imprisonment, torture, or death, yet they persisted, believing their actions could make a difference. Acts of resistance included whispering forbidden truths and distributing leaflets. Each act chipped away at the regime's facade. The regime responded with increased repression, but the crackdown only radicalized the opposition further. Section 5. The walls begin to crumble. Outside information penetrates. Despite the regime's best efforts, outside information was steadily seeping into North Korea. The flow of information was becoming a steady stream, eroding the regime's control. Cheap, concealable technology like USB drives made it difficult for the regime to control information. Smugglers brought in foreign films and music, offering a glimpse beyond state propaganda. Some tech-savvy North Koreans found ways to circumvent government firewalls. The walls of isolation were beginning to crumble, exposing the regime's vulnerabilities. Section 6. Yearning for a different song, the human cost of isolation. The human cost of North Korea's self-imposed isolation was immeasurable. Decades of limited contact with the outside world, coupled with the regime's relentless propaganda and systematic suppression of dissent, had created a society shrouded in fear, suspicion, and a profound sense of disconnection from the global community. Generations of North Koreans had grown up knowing only the reality presented to them by the regime, a world of constant threat from external enemies, of economic hardship portrayed as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good, and of a glorious future that always seemed tantalizingly out of reach. The yearning for something more, for a life free from fear and want, manifested itself in different ways. Some, driven to desperation by economic hardship or political persecution, risked their lives to escape across the dangerous border into China, often facing exploitation or repatriation to face the regime's wrath. Others, unable or unwilling to flee, sought refuge in art, music and literature, finding subtle ways to express their discontent, their hopes and their dreams for a better future. The human spirit, it seemed, could not be entirely crushed, even under the weight of the most oppressive regime. A dangerous dance, nuclear ambitions and global tensions. North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons has been a source of immense global tension. The Kim regime invested heavily in developing its nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities. Each missile test sent shockwaves through the international community. The possibility of a nuclear-armed North Korea was a nightmare scenario. The international community responded with condemnation and sanctions. This high-stakes game of brinkmanship has kept the Korean peninsula on edge. The shadow of the bear, Russia's calculated support. North Korea, often seen as isolated, has nuanced relationships, especially with Russia. The Kim regime has cultivated strategic ties with Russia to bolster its security. Russia, isolated from the West, sees North Korea as a partner to counterbalance American influence. This support includes economic aid, technical assistance, and turning a blind eye to illicit activities. For North Korea, Russia is a valuable lifeline, providing diplomatic and material support. The Dragon's Dilemma, China's balancing act. China, North Korea's closest ally, is caught between historical ties and global interests. China condemns North Korea's nuclear tests, but avoids actions that could destabilize the regime. Their relationship, rooted in the Korean War, remains complex. China provides aid, viewing North Korea as a buffer against American influence, yet North Korea's provocations test China's patience. Human rights abuses and nuclear ambitions strain their relationship. China's leaders face a dilemma: manage North Korea without risking regional stability. Section 4, a world-divided condemnation and calls for diplomacy. North Korea's actions on the world stage have consistently drawn condemnation from the international community. Its nuclear and ballistic missile tests, conducted in defiance of United Nations Security Council resolutions, have been met with widespread outrage and calls for tougher sanctions. Human rights groups have documented in harrowing detail the Kim regime's systematic abuses, including arbitrary detention, torture, forced labor, and widespread starvation. These reports have sparked international outrage and calls for accountability, though the regime has consistently denied any wrongdoing and resisted efforts to investigate its human rights record. Despite the widespread condemnation, the international community has struggled to forge a united front in dealing with North Korea. While most countries agree on the need to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula and improve human rights, there are sharp divisions over how best to achieve these goals. Some, led by the United States, advocate for a policy of maximum pressure, arguing that only tough sanctions and the credible threat of military force will persuade North Korea to change its behavior. Others, including China and Russia, favor a more conciliatory approach, emphasizing dialogue and engagement as the best way to reduce tensions and build trust. Section 5. The price of pariah, status, sanctions and their impact. Sanctions target key sectors like coal, iron ore and seafood. They exacerbate shortages of food, medicine and essentials. The regime circumvents sanctions through smuggling and cybercrime. Sanctions strengthen the regime's grip on power. The challenge is to pressure the regime while minimizing humanitarian impact. Defiance on the world stage. Despite sanctions, North Korea defies the international community, maintaining its grip on power. The Kim regime portrays itself as a victim of Western aggression, rallying its people. The 2018 diplomatic outreach showed the regime's willingness to engage in high-stakes diplomacy. The news, carried on a whisper, crackled through the static of hidden radios. The Kim regime was no more. It was a moment pregnant with the promise of unimaginable change. Across the country, a collective gasp rippled outward, followed by an eruption of jubilation. Yet beneath the surface of euphoria, a current of uncertainty ran deep. What would freedom look like? The path ahead was shrouded in mist, a mix of hope and trepidation. The swiftness of the regime's downfall, while a testament to the people's yearning for change, also carried with it the seeds of chaos. The intricate web of control, meticulously woven over decades, unraveled with startling speed, leaving a dangerous power vacuum in its wake. The military, once the iron fist of the regime, fractured along lines of loyalty. Some units, indoctrinated for generations, clung to the remnants of the old guard, while others wavered, their allegiance uncertain in the face of a leaderless nation. With the institutions of government in disarray, basic services faltered. Food distribution networks, already strained under the weight of sanctions and mismanagement, faltered, sparking panic and hoarding. Hospitals, lacking essential supplies and personnel, struggled to cope with the influx of patients, many suffering from malnutrition and the long-term effects of neglect. In the absence of a functioning police force, fear and uncertainty fueled a climate of lawlessness. Looting erupted in some areas, driven by desperation and a breakdown of social order. Citizens, accustomed to relying on the state for their every need, now faced the daunting task of fending for themselves in a world turned upside down. The world watched, holding its breath, as events in North Korea unfolded with breathtaking speed. Governments, long accustomed to the predictability of the Kim regime, scrambled to respond to the unexpected turn of events. Their reactions a mixture of cautious hope and deep apprehension. The United Nations, its Security Council, convened in emergency session, grappled with the implications of a nuclear-armed nation teetering on the brink of chaos. The specter of a humanitarian catastrophe, of a refugee crisis spilling across its borders, spurred neighboring countries to action. South Korea, bearing the brunt of a potential exodus, mobilized its military, deploying troops to secure its border and establish refugee camps. China, wary of instability on its doorstep, reinforced its own border, bracing for an influx of those fleeing the turmoil. The United States, its military presence in the region, a constant reminder of the geopolitical stakes involved, found itself in a delicate position. The collapse of the Kim regime, while a long-stated goal of American foreign policy, also carried the risk of unintended consequences, including the potential proliferation of North Korea's nuclear weapons. Section 4. Operation Hope, a lifeline to a nation in need. As the initial shockwaves subsided, the international community, galvanized by the scale of the humanitarian crisis unfolding in North Korea, launched a massive relief effort dubbed Operation Hope. Led by the United Nations and supported by a coalition of nations and NGOs, it was a race against time to provide aid and prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. Medical teams carrying desperately needed supplies were among the first responders, setting up field hospitals and mobile clinics to treat the sick and injured. Water purification units, vital in preventing the spread of disease, were deployed to villages and towns where sanitation systems had collapsed. Food distribution centers stocked with supplies airlifted in from around the world became lifelines for millions facing starvation. Schools, transformed into temporary shelters, offered a modicum of safety and comfort to families displaced by the turmoil. The task was daunting, the challenges immense, but the outpouring of support from around the world offered a glimmer of hope, a testament to the shared humanity that transcended political differences. Operation Hope, while a necessary stopgap, was only the first step on a long and arduous road to recovery. Section 5. The Long Road to Recovery. Rebuilding from the Rubble. With the immediate crisis averted, the enormity of the challenge facing North Korea came into sharp focus. Rebuilding a nation, not just physically but also socially, politically and economically after decades of totalitarian rule, would be a generation-defining undertaking fraught with complexities and potential pitfalls. The physical infrastructure, neglected for years, lay in ruins. Roads were impassable, bridges crumbled and power grids were unreliable, hindering the delivery of aid and hampering economic activity. Rebuilding these vital lifelines with the help of international donors and expertise became a top priority. Equally important was the task of rebuilding trust, both within North Korean society and between North Korea and the international community. Decades of propaganda and repression had left a legacy of fear, suspicion, and a distorted view of the world that would take time and education to overcome. The transition from a command economy to a market-based system posed its own set of challenges. With limited experience in entrepreneurship, private enterprise, and the rule of law, many North Koreans struggled to adapt to the unfamiliar demands of a free market. The promise of a new dawn, a future yet unwritten. The road ahead for North Korea is long and arduous, its path fraught with challenges, yet a glimmer of hope flickers. Fueled by the resilience of the human spirit, the transition to democracy offers a chance to determine their own destiny. The reunification of the Korean peninsula now seems within reach. The world watches as North Korea takes its first steps into the sunlight of freedom. The price of freedom. Challenges on the path to democracy. The collapse of the Kim regime is just the beginning. Transitioning to democracy is fraught with challenges. Building a culture of democratic values requires a fundamental shift. Rebuilding the shattered economy is equally daunting. The security situation remains fragile. Dismantling the nuclear program requires delicate negotiations. Weaving a new narrative for North Korea. Despite the challenges, a spirit of hope and resilience pervades North Korea. The yearning for freedom and dignity burned brightly even in the darkest days. Now they embrace the future with cautious optimism and determination. The international community plays a vital role in supporting this transition. Investing in education and healthcare empowers North Koreans to shape their future. The reunification of the Korean peninsula now seems within reach. The world watches as the two Koreas take steps toward unity. Section 3. Dawn over the peninsula, a future yet unwritten. The future of North Korea is not preordained. It will be shaped by today's choices and the courage of its people. The path ahead is challenging, but the rewards are worth the effort. The world must stand by the North Korean people. By supporting economic development, we can create a brighter future. Transformation requires patience and perseverance. The journey is challenging but worth undertaking. In this nation lies the potential for a brighter future. The dawn is breaking, illuminating a path filled with promise, a future where unity replaces division and peace prevail.